and welcome back to the program today. This is the 25th of March. This is the Derek Black program. We'll have the final hour of the broadcast coming up now. Well, I'm going to bring on a expert on race relations, Jared Taylor. He is a graduate of Yale University and the editor of American Renaissance magazine, which is a journal that describes itself as America's premier publication of race realist thought. He is the president of the New Century Foundation, and he is a regular on talk radio, television, and he's a great advocate for racial issues in America that are just not spoken about in politics today. We bring him on in a moment to talk about racial crime statistics, which I think is it's a very sensitive issue in America today, but it's one that really exists, and it's one that has to be talked about, and that's one that I imagine most people are not familiar with statistics. These come from federal crime statistics and state level statistics, and they are real. You will be able to go online and find all these further statistics, but we'll be talking to Jared Taylor about race relations in America today in a minute, and how they affect white Americans and how they affect all Americans, and how this immigration engineering project and the school integration projects and these racial engineering projects are not beneficial to anybody in the United States today. We'll be talking about that in a minute. So, all right. Well, this is a story out of Britain. KFC diner told you can't have bacon in your burger here. We're now halal. I'm not sure exactly what to make of this story, but a diner was left furious after a KFC restaurant refused to sell him. This is a Daily Mail article. After a KFC restaurant refused to sell him a bacon burger because it wasn't halal. Alan Phillips was told the restaurant was no longer selling his favorite Big Daddy burger, which contains a chicken burger with bacon, cheese, and salad, because it had decided to sell only halal food. The Burton-on-Trent branch is one of the 86 out of 750 British KFC restaurants which is now selling nothing other than halal meat. They're now selling nothing other than halal meat. The company has taken the burger off the menu because Islamic dietary law forbids Muslims from eating anything which is itself strictly forbidden. It said it was responding to increased demand for a halal menu in the areas of Britain with growing Muslim populations. Mr. Phillips said he found the change extremely unfair on non-Muslim customers. I can't believe a chain like this has taken this stance, said Mr. Phillips. Staff told me that due to the dietary laws, halal meat could not be prepared in the same place as other meats, so I couldn't have my bacon. It was like they were saying I couldn't buy bacon because it might offend people. Mr. Phillips was told he would have to travel to another KFC 5 miles away to buy his bacon burger. He protested that this was too far for him to travel. It is getting silly, he said. I have many friends who are black, white, and Muslim, but they wouldn't be forced to eat non-halal meat. I have no problem with them selling halal meat, but I would like the choice. In order for meat to be considered halal, it must traditionally be slaughtered by hand and blessed in the name of Allah, and it cannot be kept on the same premises as banned substances, including pork and alcohol. So therefore, the whole restaurant is turned over, and British people who want to buy bacon just cannot. KFC said the chickens in its halal restaurants had not been slaughtered by hand, and that it had not changed any of its welfare standards. Demand for halal food in Britain has surged in recent years as Muslim population has grown. Latest figures show the number of Muslims in Britain is growing 10 times faster than the rest of the population. The number of Muslims in Britain soared to 2.4 million, an increase of 500,000 in the 4 years from 04 to 08. And sales of halal meat now account for 11% of all fresh meat sales in the UK and are worth about $400 million a year. And a number of food chains have sought to cash in by opening halal outlets, such as Domino's Pizza, McDonald's, and several others. Domino's Pizza has opened up in Birmingham, Blackburn, and Bradford, England, where pork sausage pizza toppings have been replaced by cured turkey in all cases, because that is just the control the halal tradition in British restaurants now. So it's kind of amazing. I think Americans can't relate to this so much, but well, the cultural bombardment that occurs because of this immigration invasion, it's a real issue. And this may seem trivial, the bacon on your chicken sandwich, but it shows the contempt for British culture that the British government displays in these programs that they push. And as the Labour Party, an article on the Labour Party I read a couple of weeks ago mentioned, with a memo that came out, this immigration invasion was intended to throw in the conservatives' face their racist ideology. So with their own political motives in mind, they just run roughshod over the British people. All right, well, now it's time to bring on my guest for today, Jared Taylor, an expert in race relations and editor of American Renaissance magazine, a man who is a longtime veteran of the talk radio circuit, and I've been looking forward to this interview. This will be a good one. And so, Jared, are you on the air today?
Yes. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing well. Sorry about the telephone mix-up. They were trying to get the number together, so a couple of minutes late. But
Well, that's no problem at all.
all right. I'm doing very well. How are you today?
Oh, I'm very well, thank you.
All right. I was hoping I'd like to talk today about a sensitive issue. I think a lot of the things we talk about on this program that relate to white interests in the United States that tend to be sensitive and they tend to be criticized by the newspapers and such. But this is one that we haven't really addressed so much, and it's racial crime statistics, federally taken racial crime statistics, which show something that I imagine most white liberals would be shocked at because they can't be aware of the crime statistics. And most people, I imagine, believe that there is just a violent streak in white people going out, maybe not them, not the people who are saying it, but out there somewhere. There's a racist white America where whites are just going out day by day and committing acts of violence randomly to non-white people because they are racist, because that must be the definition of a racist country, when the reality is not that at all. It's the opposite of that. And reason would say that there's no mass of white people going out and committing random acts of violence against non-white people that would constitute this sort of racism. So I wanted to talk about what those statistics are that I imagine most people are just not aware of.
I think that a lot of white liberals have a kind of schizophrenic notion about race and crime. If you were to ask them, would they like to live in a largely minority area, I think most of them would say that they do not. And one of the reasons they might give is, in fact, a fear of higher rates of crime. Mm. And so there is an understanding at a kind of personal level. If a liberal gets off the freeway at the wrong exit and finds himself driving down Martin Luther King Jr. Boulevard, chances are he's going to lock the car doors. Now, this very same liberal will then try to argue that if blacks are incarcerated at higher rates than whites, it's probably not because they commit crime at higher rates, but because a racist criminal justice system and a racist policeman put them behind bars at a rate far disproportionate to the amount of crime that they commit. So I think liberals are capable of both realism in their daily lives, but fantasy when it comes to arguing about public policy.
This idea is laughable that there is a endemic racism in the police system today, with so much concern for racism to be rooted out in all levels of American society. I don't see how they can maintain the belief that there is a racist police system that is out and unfairly and without cause arresting blacks and arresting Latinos and throwing them in jail because it's just a white supremacist police force that doesn't want to see them on the streets. I don't see how they can maintain that belief.
They seem to be able to. It's very common among liberals. But when you think of it in practical terms, can you imagine a policeman getting a report of a mugging, for example, and the poor victim comes in bleeding and clothes torn and says, the guy, yes, I'll give you a description. He was must have been about 19, 20 years old, and he was white, and the policeman says, white? Not interested. Go away. We don't go out and arrest white people. Or imagine the victim comes in and says, he was about 18 or 19, he was white, and he was wearing a dark jacket, blah, blah. And so the police say, okay, we'll go out and get the perp, and so they go out and arrest a black guy instead. I mean, none of this makes any possible sense. The police, of course, they are promoted when they make arrests that stick, and you can't get promoted by making arrests of people who are innocent or going out and trying to round up random black men because you need to fill some sort of arrest quota. This is just a sick and twisted fantasy that liberals have about the police. And I sometimes wonder just how carefully they've even thought about it, because, as I've just described, the mechanics of, say, the police driving by a crime in process, say, and they notice that the criminals are white, and our white policeman then supposed to decide, it's a white guy, we'll leave him alone. we don't want to arrest white people. It's completely cuckoo to think in those terms. Now, there are also a number of excellent data sources that suggest that the police are making their arrests in almost perfect proportion to the racial mix of the criminals themselves. One of the best data sets is something called the National Crime Victimization Survey. That's done by the Bureau of Justice Statistics, and every year they will take a huge sample, about 100,000 Americans, and they will ask them what kind of violent crime they've been victimized by in the last year. And they will ask a bunch of detailed questions about who the perp was, whether they knew the person, male, female, a stranger, or somebody you know, race, age, etc. And what they find is that about half of all robbery perpetrators are black. Now, not all robbers, of course, are arrested. But as it turns out, of all the robbers that are arrested by the police, again, about half are black. So that suggests what is obvious common sense. The police are going out trying to find and arrest the robbers. They're not trying to vent some sort of irrational racial prejudice by rounding up blacks and by rounding up black robbers and ignoring white robbers.
And I would like to talk about the federal crime statistics themselves. Is there, in fact, as you would presume a liberal anti-racist would claim, that is there a preponderance of whites going out and attacking non-white people in this country, committing acts of violent crime against non-white people? Is that happening in the United States?
No. Another thing that the National Crime Victimization Survey does, every several years, they have a special survey on interracial crime. And as it turns out, every year there are about 770,000 violent interracial crimes committed every year involving blacks and whites. Now, whites here includes a number of Hispanics. But in any case, of this 770,000 violent crimes, blacks commit about 85% of them, and whites commit 15%. In other words, of this nearly 800,000 incidents, blacks, who are 16% of the population, account for 85% of them. What that means is that a black is about 40 times more likely on a per capita basis to commit a violent crime against a white, and as I say, that includes some Hispanics, than the other way around. 40 times. This is really quite a staggering difference. But this is a statistics that is very, very rarely reported in the mass media because it runs so counter to the liberal fantasy about the kinds of violence that are supposed to be plaguing America.
And it does. The crime statistics, I imagine most liberals just cannot be aware of them, but the ones that are, I've personally encountered they'll live in a fallacy that it's just racism. That this isn't really happening. They have no particular argument against it. It's kind of bizarre.
Well, the argument that they will come up with, if they do concede that, yes, blacks are far more likely to commit a violent crime against whites than the other way around, they will say, well, okay, that's because blacks attack whites because they assume that whites have money. Well, it is only a minority of violent crimes that have robbery as their motive. There's assault, aggravated assault, in which no property changes hands. There's rape, of course, and there's no financial motive in these crimes. But in these cases, again, you have a huge disproportion of blacks attacking whites rather than the other way around. As a matter of fact, if you look at black crime in general, you will find that when blacks commit violence, about 45% of their victims are white, 43% are black, and 10% are Hispanic. What that means is there's actually more black on white than there is black on black crime. And yet, black on black crime is, of course, this phenomenon we're all supposed to be wringing our hands over, this terrible plague that blacks have inflicted upon themselves. in terms of race relations and in terms of social harmony, clearly black-on-white crime is a much more significant phenomenon. I mean, after all, we're supposed to be living in a post-racial country. We're supposed to be living in a country that's attempting to make race something that doesn't matter. And yet when you have these huge disproportions of black violence against whites, that is a very serious phenomenon, but we don't even want to talk about it, much less try to find any solutions to it. And by the way, when whites commit violent crime, only 3% of their victims are black. So you have this tendency of whites, when they commit violence, to commit violence against other whites and almost completely leave blacks alone.
And you've mentioned the crimes that do not involve a change of monetary value. They're not non-robbery crimes. I think most people would consider one of the most vicious, probably the most vicious sort of crime to be rape. And what are the racial statistics of rapes or interracial statistics of rapes in the United States?
Well, rape is something that is very common when it's committed by blacks against black men against white women. But there are so few cases that enter the statistics of rapes by white men against black women that it's almost impossible to come up with an appropriate likelihood or comparison in statistical terms. The result is that you could very well say perhaps 200 times more likely that a black man rapes a white woman than the other way around, than a white man raping a black woman. 300 times more likely. It's very, very difficult to say because the sample sizes for statistical purposes of white men actually having raped black women is so terribly small that the numbers the ratio can vary greatly from year to year. Mm-hmm. But if you're talking about interracial rape, it is overwhelmingly the case that it is black men raping white women. You just very rarely ever come across a case of white men raping black women, and that's one of the reasons why when the stripper Crystal Gale accused those students at Duke University of having gang raped her, I immediately assumed this had to be a hoax. This would be gang rape again by a gang of whites raping a black woman. That is an exceedingly unusual and rare crime. And so just on the face of it, it seemed to me that this had to be a hoax.
Mm-hmm. And yet it's a relatively common crime in the other way around. The white girl in California in the school system who was gang raped by groups of blacks and Hispanics that gained some media attention. But the Crystal Gale story, which gained much more, turned out to be a hoax itself.
Well, that's right. I think it's worth talking, though, also about the actual multiples of the various crimes that the different races commit. For example, robbery is very much a black specialty. And blacks commit robbery at about 12 to 14 times the rate at which whites commit this crime. Now, Hispanics are also a pretty high crime rate population, but not nearly to the extent that blacks are. And so when you have blacks committing robbery at 12 times the white rate, Hispanics commit it at about 4 times the white rate. I mean, that's still a very, very significant difference. I mean, 400% as opposed to what whites are doing it at. But still, it's nothing like the black rate. Now, when it comes to, say, something like manslaughter, blacks commit this crime at about 5.5 times the white rate, Hispanics at about 3 times. Or when you lump all violent crimes together, blacks commit these crimes at about 7 times the white rate, and Hispanics at about 2.5 times the white rate. Now, there's something that is worth remembering in all of this, and that is that whites are not the least crime-prone group in the United States. Asians invariably commit all of these crimes at about 1/4 the white rate. So whites, although they are certainly compared to blacks and Hispanics, a very low crime population, they still commit crimes in general at about 4 times the Asian rate.
Hmm. And that brings me to
it's also worth bearing in mind that when crime statistics are gathered, Asians, that includes not just North Asians like Chinese, Japanese, Koreans, but it also includes relatively high crime groups like the Hmong from Southeast Asia, and also it includes Pacific Islanders, Samoans, for example. Samoans are quite a high crime group as well. Mm. There aren't that many of them, so their high crime rates do not really change the overall Asian rate that much. But if you were to limit your criminal analysis only to North Asians, Japanese, Chinese, Koreans, etc., you would probably find that their crime rates are even less than this 1/4 of the white rate that we find pretty consistently across all crimes.
Mm. And this comes to something I mentioned earlier, that liberals and anti-white racists that I will read will not ever have a proper answer to racial crime statistics. But when they do, as in the case of Nell Irvin Painter's book, which I noticed arrived at the library yesterday and I went over it, there was an entire chapter on racial crime statistics. Without addressing the statistics themselves, this professor of American history at Princeton dismissed racial crime statistics as being a statistical magic feat, something that was created by racists in order to make racial differences seem like they were they really existed. Her argument, of course, is that race is a social construct and does not really exist, and that these crime statistics are somehow forged or somehow put together or somehow a result of a racist society. And how do you answer people like this professor of Princeton who would argue that race does not exist, that these statistics are just something that happens, some sort of anomaly?
Well, when someone's mind is that diligently and resolutely closed to the facts and to the reality we all see around us, there's not much you can do. This notion that race is some kind of sociological optical illusion, or that it's a fantasy of some kind, that is something that is so obviously wrong and stupid that only very intelligent people could possibly convince themselves that it's true. Race is clearly a biological fact. When you have Congo pygmies, their children are Congo pygmies. They don't produce Danes. They don't produce Koreans. And these differences are extremely well established. They are not something that has to do with culture. You can move Congo pygmies up to the Arctic Circle, and their children are still Congo pygmies. People who argue that race doesn't exist, I suppose if they were consistent, they would argue that dog breeds don't exist, that the differences that we see in the behavior and appearance of dogs, that's all an illusion, somehow culturally manipulated by vicious racist dog breeders, perhaps. In fact, geneticists have discovered that when it comes to the human genome, it is true that the genes that human beings share are, maybe 99.5 the same. However, these genes do come with certain patternings, and about 15% of the human genome is patterned in ways that express what we would call racial differences. In the case of dogs, it's about 30% of their genome is patterned in ways that express breed differences. And no one would deny that the physical differences between different breeds of dogs are greater than the physical differences and the behavioral differences between different races of humans. But the process that is at work, the small number of genetic differences and then the larger proportion of genetic patterning, these systems operate exactly the same way between breeds of dogs and races of human beings. And the persistence of liberals in denying these biological facts, that strikes me as one of the amazing and almost hilarious self-delusions of our time.
I personally find racial crime statistics to be one of the major arguments for racial differences and for, beyond that, their impact on American society. while so many people, particularly this professor of Princeton, Nell Irvin Painter, will talk about the evils of white racism, and at the same time talk about how race is a is a social construct that does not exist. The fact that racial crime statistics are so stark, and the fact that the animus is against whites. When talking about interracial crimes, the animus is entirely against whites. It is not there is not a wave of whites committing acts of violence against non-whites from a sense of hatred and racism. It is in fact the other way around. Rapes, which I would consider, and I believe most people would consider the most hateful crime that is committed, are statistically zero of whites committing against other races. But in the reverse, it's a statistical problem. It's an enormous issue in the United States, and yet it's not discussed in media because it would be considered a racist thing to talk about the mass of non-whites committing rapes against white women. And it's incredible to me, and it seems like something that would really scare people, that these rapes and these crimes are committed, and yet they're not discussed, and the onus is placed on whites who are considered racist in these terms.
The great liberal theory is that we must never accentuate negative stereotypes unless we're talking about whites. And it's perfectly okay to describe all whites as either consciously and deliberately or unconsciously racist. So, whites are always a fair game target for negative stereotypes. However, any other group, you can't say anything, no matter how true, that is a generalization about another group, for fear that would promote negative thinking, negative stereotypes, and that would lead to white racism, because we know that all whites are basically racist, and that would pump up their racism and lead to greater violence, et cetera, et cetera. So you have a really spectacular double standard, a double standard in which you can say all kinds of wild things about white people, that they're unemotional, that they're exploitative, that they consider things more important than people, that they're just by nature cruel and rapacious and exploitative. But anything that is demonstrably, statistically, measurably true about any non-white group, that we must never say, because that would be promoting negative stereotypes.
Mm.
And of course, these crime statistics that we've been talking about, that's a perfect example of the kind of negative stereotype that our liberal rulers forbid us to discuss in public.
Mm. And they constitute the idea of a stereotype. These stereotypes are based in fact. When people are afraid of going into the black part of town, or when they're afraid of going to the Hispanic part of town, there is reason for it. It's not bigotry or racism or supremacism. There is a criminal preponderance in these groups. Finally, there's one statement in publication that New Century Foundation puts out that I think is it's surprisingly poignant in the face of the immigration invasion in the United States, is that it decides the criminality of a neighborhood besides more so than the black and Hispanic population that lives there.
That's correct. The one fact that will most usefully predict how high the violent crime rate is in any jurisdiction, a neighborhood or a state or a county, is the number of blacks and Hispanics, and you get a correlation of 0.81. Now, a correlation of 1.0 would be an absolutely perfect correlation. That is to say, as the number of blacks and Hispanics doubled, crime would double. But a correlation of 0.81 is extremely high. There is a milder correlation between, say, poverty, for example, or the unemployment rate, things like that, or the number of people who haven't completed high school. The higher the poverty, the higher the unemployment, the higher the crime. But the correlation is a very mild and gradual one, and that too could be seen in some respects as a correlation to race, because non-whites, blacks and Hispanics, are more likely to be unemployed and not have graduated from high school anyway. So you may be measuring a phenomenon of race here, rather than so much the question of being unemployed. The United States liberals have for years, generations now, insisted that what causes a crime is poverty. Well, you could probably make a better case that it goes the other way around, that crime results in poverty. When people commit crimes, they end up spending a lot of time in jail. If you have a high-crime neighborhood, businesses don't want to locate there. The fact of being poor, for example, during the Depression, the country suddenly became a whole lot poorer. Everybody became a whole lot poorer. Crime rates didn't change at all. Also, during our current economic crisis, a lot of people suddenly became poorer. There has been no corresponding leap in crime, which is what the poverty causes crime theory would predict. This is people have studied this seriously many times, and you simply cannot find a statistical correlation between these two. But that just doesn't stop liberals. Liberals don't care about the facts. It suits them to believe that poverty causes crime, and that white racism causes crime, and that racist police account for these high black and Hispanic incarceration rates, and the facts just don't matter. They will continue repeating these myths until they run out of breath.
And it does, in fact, concern me, these accusations that get put out to people like yourself and people like this radio program, that it's supremacist to talk about crime statistics. When it's really, the hate is in the fact that these immigration programs are foisted upon the American people, and the resulting crime is the resulting crime, when spoken about by the ones who are being afflicted by it, is considered racism. I cannot really imagine that shows like this are called supremacist and racist when they talk about the crime that is resultant in multiracialism and the multiracialist programs that are put on children in school and are put on neighborhoods, and the immigration invasion is what causes this. And anyone who speaks about it, anyone who talks about the resulting crime, is considered a racist and a white supremacist when they're when they're concerned about their own families, their own neighborhoods. So there's nothing more personal than that. And that's what's being affected here.
You have to draw some distinctions, though. Most blacks here in the United States were not immigrants in the traditional sense. They're descended from people who were brought here as slaves, and they are the highest crime group. Then there are other Asians, there are other immigrants, I meant to say, Asians, who actually commit crimes at a lower rate than whites. But certainly the largest number of immigrants coming these days are Hispanics, Mexicans, and they commit all crimes. I should have mentioned this earlier, but not just violent crimes, but white-collar crimes as well, at higher rates than whites. So, yes, unquestionably, when it comes to immigration, it would behoove us to think in terms of which groups are likely to contribute favorably and substantially to the country, and which groups are not going to fit in and are going to cause trouble to the country. And I think if you evaluate things realistically, one would conclude with any kind of objectivity that Mexicans are probably among the most undesirable immigrants possible, partly because they come from just across the border and they can maintain their Mexican nationalism with no difficulty at all. But the most obvious reason is that they are coming from a country that has a historical territorial grievance against the United States. Mexicans, in huge numbers, about 70% of Mexicans will tell you that the Mexican-U.S. border is illegitimate, that the northern part of Mexico was illegally and violently taken from Mexico during the Mexican-American War, and as a consequence, Mexicans have an absolute right to cross that border whenever they feel like it, that the United States should not have sovereignty. Well, what good does it do? In fact, it's obvious that it does terrible damage to the United States to let people like that come in huge numbers, millions, into the United States, where they are going to continue to exercise this revanchist attitude towards American territory. It's utter insanity to fill the country, especially the southwestern part of the United States, with people who think that should belong to Mexico. We're obviously building up terrible problems for the future. That's a different matter from crime statistics, however.
Yes. But I think this program has brought to light a lot of the racial distinctions and the things that only seem to be the racial arguments are only ever given to whites as racist people, and that seems to be the political doctrine in the United States today. And beyond that, in the academic circles, that race is a social construct seems to be the line. I read over the history of white people yesterday when I arrived at the library, and it's amazing that racial distinctions could be considered a social construct, while at the same time this black professor of Princeton feels that she needs to dress down white people as a group. And the facts of the matter are really not an aggression by whites. It is that whites who are being victimized in the United States and in other countries as well. It's an incredible situation.
The tendency to call any white person who deviates from racial orthodoxy a racist or a white supremacist, it's a reflection of just how deeply rooted this orthodoxy is. The orthodoxy is almost has a religious status, and because it has religious status, you cannot oppose it simply in terms of the facts. We were talking about crime statistics. The United States Department of Justice and the Bureau of Criminal Justice Statistics, in some respects, their statistics are awful, but in some respects, they're pretty good. And if you look at them carefully, there is simply no way to conclude that blacks do not commit violent and also white-collar crimes at a higher rate than whites. That is the inescapable conclusion. And yet, people will either simply ignore that, or they will say, whether it's true or not, we mustn't talk about it because it's bad for race relations. It only stimulates whites in their own wicked racism. So even bringing up the truth, bringing up a fact, bringing up something that, for example, has a very, very important role to play in the whole controversy about racial profiling, for example. Even bringing up something that is clearly and demonstrably true, that is an act of racism because it violates our orthodoxy, the orthodoxy being based on the notion that every single racial group is absolutely equal in every possible way.
Exactly. Well, thank you, Jared, for coming on the program today. I think this has been a really excellent interview, and it's brought to light a lot of issues that like I said at the beginning, I imagine most people just are not aware of the facts because that's a better thing than to imagine that they disregard them. I think this program has brought to light many things.
Well, I hope what we have talked about has been of interest to your listeners. It's been a pleasure to be on your program.
No, I really appreciate it, and thank you for coming on today.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Goodbye. So that is Jared Taylor. You can find the magazine that he edits, American Renaissance, at amren.com, or the statistics specifically at colorofcrime.com. So that is amren.com and colorofcrime.com. We'll be going to break now. When we come back, we'll have the final 15 minutes of this program today. This is the Derek Black Show, March 25th, 2010.